Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm doing a video of 6 button-shy games that didn't work for me. That in some way, shape, or form, I may have enjoyed some of these more than others, which I did. Some of these I didn't quite enjoy, others I enjoyed but don't feel the need to keep, but ultimately these are 6 button-shy games that are leaving my collection. To that end, if you want to check out another video of 7 button-shy games that did work for me, that I am keeping, and that I enjoyed to various degrees, feel free to check out the linked video in the description down below. But with that said, let's go ahead and dive into these. Now, I will be going into each of these, how they generally play, but it'll be very high level. I'll be missing some setup details and some rules and things. It's general high level overview of how they play. And let's go ahead and start off with Ragemore. You see, Ragemore is a game about trying to accomplish quests as you take down baddies and manage your heroes. Now, this is a good time to mention that when it comes to button-shy games, a lot of them are basically they're a bunch of games that are trying to make it work with 18 cards. And to that end, some of them are incredibly creative and very cool, and I adore them. And others just maybe they're creative and cool to someone else, but they don't work as well for me, and sometimes I don't know where that line is as far as why they do or don't work. I know that Ragemore has its fans, but for some reason, this particular puzzle hasn't worked for me. You see, in the game, you're going to have your own heroes, you're going to have some quests, and again, a setup, I'm kind of just going ahead and playing some cards out over here, but you're going to have your items, you're going to have your quests as you go through the game, and then you're going to have the specific encounter you're trying to face off against. Now, on your turn, you have a chance of either accomplishing a quest with the heroes you have, alternatively, you can engage with the encounter, you can fight the encounter and try to see if you can defeat it, or you can try to recruit a card from quests, encounters, wherever, to try to gather more heroes. If you don't resolve the encounter, you're going to have to deal with the ability of the encounter, and you're basically trying to finish all the quests before you run out of resources in the game. That's the pure idea. You're matching symbols to various areas, you're matching the symbols of the heroes to the encounters, you're trying to recruit new characters by turning them, by flipping them. When you recruit someone, you'll be flipping to the other side, and ultimately you're trying to accomplish enough quests, but being mindful of the fact that whenever you accomplish a quest, you're not dealing with the encounter. That means the encounter is going to slowly be draining your resources as you go through the game. That's the pure idea of Ragemore. For whatever reason, this puzzle didn't work for me. For whatever reason, I found this puzzle to be less satisfying and more just frustrating as I went through it. It's a very clever system in terms of you have a bunch of cards that have a ton of information on them. You have the symbols for quests, you have the ability it's going to trigger if you don't deal with it. You have the strength values to be mindful of the heroes and the villains you're fighting off against, and the cards flip to two different sides, so that both a hero and a villain you have to engage with. Very clever as far as the multi-use cards without being overly draining on information, but for whatever reason, I just found the puzzle frustrating. I feel like it should work for me as far as what's happening, but I never found it rewarding. I just found the trade-off, the back and forth, to be mostly obvious and or just not overly rewarding experience. I can't heavily define why. Again, this is one of those button-shy games that I feel from a pure rule set feels very clever and feels like I should enjoy it more than I do, and yet I don't. Next up, we have Battlecrest. Battlecrest, and by the way, Ragemore, is a solo game. These games are mostly going to be solo or two-player games, sometimes both. Now we have Battlecrest up next, which does have a solo mode. I have not played the solo mode. I've only played this one. I've only played this two-player, and Battlecrest is a game of, well, a skirmish game. You're going to have your two sides over here, and you also have some extra cards if you got the expansion, but effectively you're going to be setting up a battlefield, and I'm not going to fully do it, but let's go ahead and grab some cards over here. Where are our battle cards? You're going to have some cards that go into the arena, if I can find this. Do I have 2 decks somewhere? Let me see what I have over here. I might have 2 decks. You might have to give me a second over here. I went ahead and grabbed my other cards because they were off to the side over there. But you're basically going to have terrain over here. Terrain that you're going to be setting up in the middle of the board in one way or another. Being mindful of the various symbols. And they have a little setup symbol of how it works. But you're going to be setting up a grid that's going to have different terrain at different points in a way that kind of builds the grid in a way that you can kind of navigate through it. I'm doing a horrible job setting it up. But from there, your characters are going to be moving around the board, navigating, and using their abilities in the game. Now, the actual gameplay on this one, this is by far the most complicated to actually explain without going into a whole bunch of rule set, but effectively it is a two-player head-to-head skirmish with a bunch of powers and abilities, with a grid that you can set up that has a degree of interesting decision space as far as how you're going to navigate it. And ultimately, I felt this one was far too heavy on the actual rules compared to the gameplay experience I got out of it in a way that I just didn't find rewarding enough. I thought this was overly complicated for the 18 card system it is, and while the gameplay ultimately works and is enjoyable, I'd rather just play a full-on skirmish game. And yes, you don't have skirmish games that fit into this kind of pocket size, and I respect that, but I don't need every game style to be compressed into a pocket style game. I think Battlecrest is very clever, and I would not be surprised if it has a lot of fans out there, but for me, ultimately, this one is a bit too complicated, and it's one of those games that feels like they're trying to make it into a pocket-sized game as opposed to a game that fits naturally into a pocket-sized game. And to that end, Battlecrest is one that I've enjoyed, but don't feel the need to continue to dive into. From there, we're going to go back to this side over here where we have Death Valley. Now, Death Valley is one that has a solo mode. This one I've played both solo and two-player, although I think I prefer the 2-player more, although I think I prefer the 2-player more in this game, but this game is basically going on a journey. You're going to have your scrapbook and your journey, and you're going to have the desert over here, but effectively you have these cards that you're trying to take from the desert area, and you have to select cards one at a time, placing them either into your scrapbook, or alternatively, on your turn you can take an action to move it into your journey. Now the main thing you're being mindful of is you have 2 different rows, and each player has 2 different rows as they take cards from the desert, and you're going to have the abilities that are going to score for you, whether they're on the scrapbook or the journey, but you have the fact that you have to be mindful of the fact that the stars on cards only score if they are in your scrapbook, but the problem is if you have too many symbols on your scrapbook, if you have too much, you're going to push your luck, you'll ultimately bust, and you'll have to get rid of the cards in your scrapbook. Other way around, by the way. I think I've been mixing up journey and scrapbook the whole time there. But past that, you're basically on your turn, you either take a new card, or you move a card from your journey into your scrapbook to make it safe, but worth less points, but you no longer have to worry about busting, and you go back and forth, and then whoever scores the most points wins. I like this one. It's fine. It's definitely enjoyable. I had a good time with it. It's a simple, compelling puzzle, but it didn't hit any high notes. It's one that I had fun with it. I had fun with this one. It's okay. I enjoy it. I think it's fun. It didn't hit any high notes, which I said already. From there we move on to Ugly Gryphon Inn. Now this one I actually almost did keep. In fact, this one I kept for a while and even got the expansions for it. But this is one where effectively, whole lot of cards here. We got more than 18 cards, but effectively you're managing an inn in this game. You're gonna have your row of patrons that you're trying to be mindful of them in the inn, and you're gonna have these patrons have to be slowly managed to you have your bar and you have your inn, and you're moving patrons from your bar to your inn. Be mindful that every time you move a patron from your bar to your inn, you have to trigger all their abilities on them, and those abilities will slowly potentially have impacts of having people eventually leave your inn. The larger the inn gets, the more likely there is of a chance of something triggering in a way that causes it to move in. Again, they all have specific abilities. They're all going to be swapping around. You'll have random things happening. But then additionally, you want to be mindful that as you have patrons in your bar, if you have too many of the same symbol, it will trigger the irks of certain people in your inn, and that will cause them to leave as well, which will potentially cause a cascading effect of different symbols triggering differently, since a lot of these things trigger based on adjacencies. So the entire game ultimately comes down to reading a whole lot of abilities and then puzzling through how to make sure everyone stays all friendly like in your inn. That's the game, and it works very well. I think this one has a lot of thought behind it and is incredibly rewarding to go through, and it's just a satisfying experience. And playing with some of the modules, like these dragons over here, those are a lot of fun to go through. I really enjoy this one, and there's a reason I'm getting rid of it, which is ultimately I found that the more I played it, the more I felt like I was going through a sequence of trying to pass tests. And the game starts to feel like you're passing tests. It starts to feel not like you're doing anything clever and amazing, but rather how you're reading every single card again and again and again, trying to find that one combination that will result in the least patrons leaving the inn. It is a compelling puzzle, and it is a rewarding puzzle, but one that the more I played it, it felt more like homework as opposed to an enjoyable puzzle, and to that end, I think I'm fine letting it go. From there we have Making Manhattan, which is a 2-player drafting experience. I'm not grabbing all the cards over here, but effectively players are going to go ahead and set up their starting area over here, their central perk over here, and then from there they're going to go ahead and be drafting cards that will go into the various, I think you actually set up like this over here, and you'll be grabbing cards. Let me see where it goes. So you have to set up your central park, then characters are going to be grabbing cards that will go into the various areas of the grid, drafting from a central row as they put cards into their villages in different areas, trying to find certain cards over here. But as you put them into the different areas of the board, being mindful of the scoring objectives. Basically, you're going to have 3 cards that you're trying to draft from, so 3 cards in the row that you're trying to draft from, and you're choosing those cards, alternating back and forth as you add them to your park, being mindful of which location they go. You have your central park over here, but then different cards will have different scoring abilities depending on which area they're in. This card will score this over here, but if it's over here, it's going to score this box instead, so you have to be mindful of what card you take, where you put it in your park, and how ultimately it's going to score. It's a fun little puzzle, and I enjoy this one. The only problem is I find that within the genre of 18 cards and trying to optimize your score, whether playing it as a solo game or playing as a 2-player game, I think Button Shy makes better games in the same genre. I've enjoyed Making Manhattan. It's a fun little game to go back and forth on, but I think other games that you'll see in my other video of the ones I'm keeping just do that system in a way that is cleaner, more interesting in the decision space, and just more satisfying to go through. Which brings us to lastly, we have Unsurmountable, and this one, for whatever reason, again, just didn't work for me. You see, Unsurmountable is a game of, well, basically basically trying to surmount the mountain, I guess. I'm not sure how you'd say that over there. But you're going to have a row over here. You're going to have a row that you set up on the board. And you have to be mindful of the fact that each time you have a card in the row, you can take the leftmost card and you can add it to your mountain. And slowly but surely start to build a mountain that moves up until eventually you're resting cards on top of one another. So you put another card over here. And then maybe we can go ahead and add this card over here. And we can add this card over here. The problem is now we don't have a chain of mountain over here. So maybe we really have to add this card over here. But you're trying to grab these cards. The problem is you can only actually add them from this row over here that you're drafting from base camp. And on your turn, you either select the leftmost card and add it to your mountain, or alternatively, you use the ability on a different card, and the combination of using those abilities or adding cards to your mountain will eventually lend you to creating a mountain in which you have a single path that moves all the way up to the summit. The concept works. The concept is very intriguing. The actual abilities I found underwhelming. I found none of the abilities were overly satisfying, and to that end, it felt a bit like just either the card works for you, or you take an ability that does something, but didn't feel like a clever manipulation puzzle so much as a small, tedious... The abilities and the card play didn't result in an experience that was satisfying. It resulted in an experience that definitely had a degree of challenge and ultimately works as a game, but for me, ultimately wasn't a satisfying experience. It was one that you're trying to get from start to finish, literally from start to finish, from base camp all the way to the top of the mountain, but one that didn't feel rewarding as you went through it. And those are 6 button shy games that did not work for me. Once again, we have Ragemore, a game of taking down, trying to accomplish quests while taking down enemies with your heroes, ultimately about managing the resource pool that is your heroes. I theoretically feel I should enjoy this one, but for whatever reason, I don't quite as much. We have Battlecrest over here, which I think is very rewarding, but I think is too complicated and too much going on for the game system. Like, I taught it to one person to play it, and I didn't feel the need to teach it to anyone else because it's too much for not enough. I'd rather play a full-on skirmish game. Over here we have Death Valley, which is rewarding, but I think there's more games that are more compelling as far as the 2-player head-to-head draft. When you only have 18 cards to pick from, there's only so much you can do that really makes the game stand out as being supremely clever, and Death Valley works, but it doesn't stand out. Similarly, we had the same problem with Making Manhattan, enjoyable, but didn't stand out for me in a 2-player drafting or scoring optimization. We have Unsurmountable, which is a fun little challenge of trying to figure out how to manipulate cards to get to the top of the mountain, part of this Simply Solo line from Scott Alms and Button Shy Games, of which I've enjoyed some of them, and I didn't find Unsurmountable to be particularly compelling. And then lastly, we have Gryphon Inn, Ugly Gryphon Inn. Eagle Gryphon would be a different company. Ugly Gryphon Inn, which to me, I kept this one for a bit and really enjoyed the puzzle it gave me, but ultimately at the end of the day, I found it started to feel like homework as opposed to a satisfying experience. And that's what we have over here. These are the 6 Button Shy games that did not work for me, and with that, feel free to check out the other video if you want to see 7 Button Shy games that do work for me, including one that I give a 5 out of 5. I adore one of these games. And in any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.